I did not have any plan to check out the Z9 for today's tests. I just only wanted to understand whether the Sony A7IV can give clean high ISO results compared to the Nikon Z6II. The Z6II is a 24 megapixel camera and the A7IV is a 33 megapixel camera. So it was a valid question for me. Plus, I do not own the Z9. But I thought my friend Chuck from AP Studios does, so I asked him to share a few Z9 files for study. By the time I ended my little tests, the whole thing became all about the Z9. Let me give you a hint. The Nikon Z50's ISO 100 is equivalent to Z9's ISO 2500. Yeah, keep watching. So I actually tested the raw files from 7 different cameras: the Z9, the Z6, the Z6II, Sony A7IV, Nikon Z50, Fuji X-C4 and Fuji X-T3. I own all of these cameras except the Z9. For today's discussion, I'm going to talk about 3 cameras: the Z9, the Z6II and the Sony A7IV. Before I start showing you how the files behave when pushed hard, let me tell you my incredible findings, the top lines. Number 1, all 3 cameras have dual native ISOs while shooting raw photos. The Sony A7IV has the second native ISO kicking in at ISO 400. The Z6II has the same thing, the dual native ISO kicking in at ISO 800. So the Sony A7IV comes at 400, the Z6II comes at 800. That sounds impressive. The Nikon Z9 has dual native ISO kicking in at ISO 500. I also tested the Nikon Z50. The Nikon Z50's ISO 100 is equivalent to the Z9's ISO 2500. Yes, that's right. That's just how clean the Z9 is. We will come back to the Z9 quickly and you will see all the manipulations with the raw files. I'm going to share the screen as I work on the raw files on Lightroom, so you'll see that live. The Sony A7IV provides cleaner images at ISO 400 than the Z6 does at ISO 800. Understand that the Sony A7IV gives better, cleaner images at ISO 400, native ISO 400, dual native ISO 400 compared to Z6II's dual native 800. Why is that significant? Because understand, when dual native ISO kicks in, the second level, it's supposed to give you very clean results. Although I would prefer to have the Z6II's 800 ISO because you get one stop more. You can just push the ISO higher and hope to get better, cleaner images at a higher ISO than 400. It means when you adjust for the additional one stop extra that you get while using that ISO 800 on the Z6II, you will see slightly cleaner results on the Sony A7IV shot on ISO 400. I'll explain this to you. Let's say it's the golden hour and you're shooting the beautiful birds in that soft golden light. The birds are moving fast, so you need high shutter speed, at least 1250th of a second. But the light is not as strong because it's a falling sun. The sunlight is weak. So since you are using a long lens, your brightest aperture is f4 or f5.6, very likely. Not very bright. Now you need high ISO at this point because you cannot slow your shutter speed down to a more friendly shutter speed. You can't do that. You cannot increase your aperture because most long lenses do not have 1.8 or 2.8. But at the same time, you want clean details on the bird's feathers, and this is one of those difficult challenges, the difficult situations. You have 2 options right in front of you: the Z6II, where you can use the dual native ISO at 800, or the Sony A7IV's ISO of 400 dual native. Of course, a clean ISO of 800 will give you a stop more so that you can comfortably keep the shutter speed high, because now you're using a stop more, you're boosting it through the sensor and you're still getting clean images, right? So you can maintain higher shutter speed. That's how it looks like, giving you better images. Except that that it's not true. Even if you maintain the same shutter speed and get a darker image when you're seeing through the viewfinder, darker image output from the Sony A7IV at ISO 400, even if you maintain every other settings the same, right? Your aperture and shutter speeds the same, your ISO on the Sony is now at 400 because you want to get the as clean images as possible. The file will be cleaner after post-processing, exposure bump and shadow recovery than the file you'll get from the Z6II at ISO 800. That's right. This just tells us how much better the new Sony sensor is despite high resolution, and it tells us that a $2,500 camera, what these cameras can do today. It's amazing. The Z9, coming back to the Z9, the Z9 high efficiency star files are stellar. At ISO 3200, you can easily push the exposure bar by 3 stops, then push the shadow by plus 100 and still get stunningly clean images. The noise and artifacts produced by the sensor is minimal, almost nothing. And understand, when I did those tests, I cropped in heavily, almost by 200%, and then after that I zoomed in and applied all these very difficult settings like pushing the exposure very high up and really pushing the shadow recovery. This tells me two things. First, ISO 1250 is very usable on the Z9, even if you underexpose by about a stop or a little more than that. And secondly, that f6.3 lenses and of course f5.6 lenses are not a problem in most daylight scenarios, even when the light is falling a little bit, because the sensor on the Z9 is that good, it's that capable. I added that because there are some concerns about the recently released 800mm PF lens by Nikon, and the concern is it's too slow. It's probably not, given the kind of tech you're getting inside the Z9. Oh, it's amazing. And that's the one camera I don't have. I decided to not to buy it primarily because of the size and nothing else. So now let's get into viewing the files. And if you find value in this video, then do like and share, and all that good stuff really helps the channel grow. Z9 at ISO 64, and if you look at the settings, exposure value +5, highlights brought down by 50%, and shadows all the way up. Okay, that's what you do in real world situations. You push the shadows and you manage the highlights and you adjust the exposure. In this case, you're pushing the exposure to see if there is any underlying noise that's generated by the system, the sensor, and all of the magic inside the bodies, where they're creating noise on their own, and what's the amount of noise that they're creating. So at ISO 64, it's clean. There is absolutely nothing. This is absolutely clean. Let's go and see ISO 200. I can see one red dot here, a few 2 green dots, 1 2 3 5 in total. There are like a handful of dots when I push the file so much. Okay, when I push the file so much. So let's go to ISO 400. I am starting to see some of the noise. These files are all very cropped in, and I am zooming in further and I'm pushing the file so much, I'm starting to see some grain, some noise. Are you going to see this in real world situations? Never at ISO 400, but you just realize that this is not the cleanest at ISO 400. There is noise that's not visible to us at ISO 400. Now when I move to ISO, I do not have, unfortunately, the ISO 500 file, but what happens when you move to the next file, which is at ISO 640? It cleans up. It's cleaner than ISO 400. Look at this. This is ISO 400. This is cleaner at ISO 640. I'm pretty sure it's at ISO 500 where we see the second base, native base for ISO on the Z9, and you'll get suddenly a much cleaner file out of the Z9 at ISO 500. I'm pretty confident about it. I'll come back and confirm that to you. I do not have a Z9. I got these files from my friend Chuck. Check him out at AP Studios on YouTube. He does his live shows every Sunday and every Wednesday. So you're kind enough to share these files with me. I just didn't ask for the ISO 500 file. I mean, okay. So anyway, I'm pretty sure that it's at ISO 500 that the files suddenly clean up. Okay, you can already see that at 640 it's cleaner. Let's move forward. 800, it gets a little busy, but when you zoom out and just look at a 200% cropped raw file with all those adjustments, extreme adjustments, you see nothing. It's absolutely clean. So in real world, ISO 12150, I say little bit, it's not a problem. 1600, not a problem. Little bit, but not a problem. ISO 2500, now I'm starting to see some noise. Now this could be problem in some situations, right? When I zoom in, I see a little bit of busy noise. At ISO 3200, I'm seeing more noise clearly, but it's not bad. And the noise pattern, it's like fine grains. They're not coarse, okay? And that's the difference between the Z9 and the rest of the cameras, whether you talk about the Z50, Z6II, Z6, Sony A7IV, the XC4 and the X-T3. I did the test for all of these cameras. I'm only going to present you Z6II, A7IV and Z9 for this comparison, for this test, because of the paucity of time, nothing else. Okay, and so at ISO 3200 you're getting an incredibly clean file, yeah, but if we keep zooming in, you'll see some noise. Let's look at Z50 for a while. Okay, you just look at it. Just look at the Z50 file at ISO 100. When you push the file by 5 stops, reduce the highlights by 50% at -50, and push the shadows, look at the file, you can see grain. You can see as much grain from the Z50 as you can see at, let's say, I would say at ISO 1250. No, not even that. I think more. 1600. Yeah, 1600. Maybe 250. Yes, 250. And look at this. Z9, not 250, 2500. Z9, ISO 2500, and Z50, ISO 100. Can you see? Can you see the difference? Can you see? Look at the performance of the Z9. That's how much better. It's literally 5 times better. Isn't it? Let me count. So this is ISO 2500, right? That's how many stops from 100? Almost 4.5 stops, right? Almost 4.5 stops. That's exactly how much more the Z9 is in terms of price, in terms of cost. Yeah, that's funny. So that's the Z50 file at ISO 100. Oh my god. But please understand that, it doesn't mean the Z50 is a bad camera. Okay, let's be real here. I was zooming in further. If I zoom out, it's already cropped in onto a 40 megapixel sensor. You see those spots are also getting larger, right? So realistically, if you have to look at the Z9 file at ISO 2500, okay, I would zoom in further. Okay, maybe a little bit. It's not accurate, but you zoom in further and then compare this with the Z50. Z50 is far more spotty. They're like really big chunks of spots there all over. Okay, anyway, now if you look at it, really, if you reduce the exposure down to, let's say, +4, not +5, or maybe +3.5, okay, this is fine. You can't be wrong that much. Look, you can't say anything. It's fine now, right? If you definitely, you can't be off. Your exposure can't be off that much, which means you're not getting that that level of dynamic range, but you have to be slightly more careful about your lighting, careful about the scene you're shooting, and just get your exposure overall correct when you're shooting the Z50. Let's move on quickly, just go through these files quickly. So all of these files are pretty noisy, really. ISO 400, A640. See, at 400, this was a Z50 file, okay? Suddenly at 640, this is what you see. It's clean. Again, I do not have ISO 500, and I think the Z50 is cleaning up at ISO 500 or at ISO 640. So I would shoot it at ISO 640, the Z50. If I have to increase the ISO, I'm not going to shoot at ISO 400 or 200 or 160 or 250 or 320. I'm going to go straight up to 640. Now this is how 1250 looks like. 1600. Oh my god. Yeah, this is difficult. But even on the Z50, if you bring down the exposure to, let's say, I think plus 2.5, that's it. You bring it down to 2, it's manageable. It's decent. It's not bad. But this is an extreme test. So here you have the Z6II. Yeah, the Z6II. Right, now look at the file quality. It's quite clean. It's nothing like the Z9. I can see some stuff there at ISO 100, right? And I pushed the exposure to +5, the shadow to 100, and brought the highlight down to -50. This is a very clean file, let me tell you. Very clean file. Where is the second native ISO? Okay, this is 500, ISO 500. This is 640. You can see what you get at 640 with those settings. If you manage it better, if you just reduce the shadows a little bit, you keep it at 50 plus 50, because pushing it to 100 is quite extreme. Now it's fine. It's quite nice, in fact. Okay, so ISO 640, this is what you get. At ISO 800, suddenly you get a much cleaner image, right? And if you want to have a squeaky clean image here, all you have to do is bring down the shadows to, let's say, 70. Yeah, and exposure to, let's say, 4. Somewhere here. And that's it. Look at the file. It's clean. It's beautiful. You're pushing the exposure value by +4 and shadows by +70. This is incredible performance. Okay. So the Z6II has dual native ISO, and the second base is at 800. And let's move forward. 1250, 1600, 2000, 2500. Pretty coarse. This is 3200. Okay, 3200. We should be able to use. We want to use these ISOs on our cameras. What's this? How can we manage it? What do we have to do? We have to bring it down to, I think, +3. If we keep it at +3, as in we have the latitude of shooting 3 stops underexposed, and we're okay with pushing the shadows only by +70, and we're going to have a pretty clean image. Look at that, guys. A very clean. I mean, I'm really zooming in. You see, I'm zooming in. It's already cropped in 200%. I'm really zooming in, right? So that's unfair. And if I'm okay to manage the situation a little bit better, shoot more responsibly, and I shoot only 2 stops underexposed at 3200, 2 stops underexposed at 3200, and I'm pushing the shadows up by plus 70, or maybe let's say plus 100, I have a pretty clean file, right? Okay, so but this may not be possible. You may be in a situation where you're inadvertently, without wanting to, you can keep your exposure value down by 2.5 stops, because you need to have a higher shutter speed, because maybe you're shooting fast subjects. In that case, you're still going to get a very clean file, so that's fantastic. Okay, now let's set them back to what they were. Okay, this is ISO 3200. Let's look at ISO 4000 I mean. Let's go directly to 6400. Yeah, 6400. Wow, oh my god, look at the noise. Okay, so there's a lot of color noise clearly on these Nikon files. Okay, now how do you manage this situation at ISO 6400? How much can you push this file? What do you have to remember while shooting? Let's say the sun is about to go down and you're still shooting some fast moving subjects. Okay, what can you do? I don't think you can push the shadows so much to plus 100. I think it's okay to keep it to around plus 70 again, like I said. And again, if you're okay to sort of, you know, underexpose by 2.5 stops, you still have a very clean image, okay? If you cannot, you need half a stop more, meaning you need to increase your shutter speed by half a stop more, right? And what you're seeing through the camera is a pretty dark image by 2.5 stops or so. And you're planning to just put the files on the laptop or the computer and then bring the exposure back. And you want it to be like this. You want to push it up to plus 3. You have very minimal noise. It's not much at all. All you have to do is, okay, let's just push it. Yeah, this is punch in more. You see the noise here. Let's just do a little bit of noise correction. Where is it? Yeah. So I want to take care of the color noise a little bit. Okay, nothing much happened. Luminance noise. Okay, they're gone. They're going at plus 30. Plus 30, that's about it, not more. You see, it's such a clean file. It's a beautiful file. See, if you use noise reduction a lot, you may lose some details. So I'd say even give it to plus 25. Okay, and this file, you're really zoomed in. So when you see the full file, you're not going to see much loss in image quality. So this is incredible. I think this is very good performance at ISO 6400. Okay, this is very clean. This is extremely clean. This is a 33 megapixel file, right? So let's move to 125. I don't see any. Do you see any noise? I mean, I see a little bit of color noise. It's purple and red. I see a little more of that at 160, little more of that at 200. Nothing to bother me at all. At 250, slightly some dots are more prominent than others. At 320, I'm seeing a little bit of noise now. I'm seeing the noise now. But at this extreme settings, right? If I just bring the shadows back, okay, and I bring it down to 50. I mean, I don't see much here. It's suddenly clean. Okay, so let's go back. This is what you see at and I was zoomed in. Remember that I was zoomed in further after cropping into these files. Let's go to ISO 400. Suddenly, can you see how they clean up? How the files clean up? This is ISO 320. The next file is ISO 400, and here you go. Look, it clears up. So for the Sony A7IV, the second base ISO comes at ISO 400, which is incredible, which is good. And we'll see later how ISO 400 on Sony, which is the second base, compares to the Nikon's ISO 800, which is Nikon's second base. Okay, by second base I mean second base ISO. Thank you. Okay, we're moving to ISO 500, 640, 800, 1000, 1250. This is a bit noisy, but let's go to ISO 250. I think this is pretty fine. This is pretty nice. ISO 250 isn't a problem, and we discussed about ISO 3200. Let's look at ISO 6400. This looks busy. Okay, what can we do here? Can we shoot at -3 exposure value? Okay, and if we don't have to push the shadows beyond +70, maybe +70, yeah, maybe even, okay, +70 is fine. Okay, and let's say if we manage the luminance noise a little bit, let's go up to 25, 26, same thing. Okay, and we handle the color noise a little bit more as well. We see a very clean file, and maybe all you have to do is reduce the shadow recovery down a little bit, or maybe keep it at 70 and then bring down the exposure to 250 and maybe bring out the overall white by +20. I don't know, is it better? Yeah, I think so. So this is interesting. I mean, what the Sony files can do. This is really interesting. Yeah, the Sony A7IV at ISO 400. Okay, the highlights are reduced down to -50 and the shadows are pushed to the maximum. Why have I kept it to +5? Because you see, at 400 ISO, this is a stop lower compared to Nikon's 800. All other things being equal, shutter speed and aperture value being equal, if you're only playing with ISO, right, you are already at a higher ISO on the Nikon at 800, but on the Sony you're at a lower ISO at 400. So if you push both in the same manner, like if you push both the Sony and the Nikon files to +5 exposure value, you're pushing the Nikon files further, right? Because it's already doing a bit more inside the camera. Well, that's my logic, and I could be wrong, but to simplify it, I think we can all agree that 800 is a stop higher than 400, so therefore this to me makes sense. Now, what happens if we compare these two files, right? This is the Nikon file and this is the Sony file. Okay, now let's look at them individually. Honestly, both are quite clean, given the fact that you pushed it to +4, +5 in terms of exposure, and then shadow pushed to the maximum. But I have to say, the Sony file here looks cleaner. I see less noise here and overall deeper blacks. Okay, here I feel as if it looks like the black is a little more towards gray. Okay, and there are definitely more dots, more noise on the Nikon file. So even if you equalize them during post, looks like the Sony file still gives you cleaner results. It doesn't matter if you shoot at 800 on the Nikon, while shooting you may feel that you're shooting at a higher you're shooting a cleaner file, but when you put it on the computer, if you ever push the file to their extremes, you're likely to get a much cleaner file. Slightly, I can't say much, but definitely a slightly cleaner file coming, cleaner picture image quality coming from the Sony A7IV compared to the Z6II. And this just tells us how good both of these sensors are. They're amazing sensors, right? Now I'm not sure if the Canon R6 can compete with these two. We already know the Canon R6 is not as competed in this as the Sony A7III, but now the Sony A7IV has really pushed the envelope quite a lot. Now, so this is at the dual, at the second ISO base, right? Now let's look at how both of these cameras handle a high ISO value like 3200, right? Let's look at that. I think that's going to be interesting, and let's compare that between Sony and Nikon. So this is the Nikon file. This is a Nikon Z6II. This file is shot at ISO 3200. We can already see that at exposure +5, when the highlights are pushed down to -50 and the shadows are pushed to +70. When it's pushed to 100, I can see a lot more green pixels, noise all over the file. Can you see it? I don't know whether you'll be able to see it on YouTube, because I can definitely see I can see a lot of dots, green dots, right? So, but if I push the exposure value down, okay, to let's say +3, which is quite decent, okay, +3. If you have to push a file that much, you're already doing something wrong. But let's say you're already at ISO 3200, and here you're pushing a file to +3, okay. There is hardly any noise on the file, and if I zoom in, I can see a little bit. This is already cropped almost 200%, and then on top of that, I'm zooming in further, right? And you know the settings at ISO 3200. So this is a very difficult to deal with situation. Now, file number 79. Now again, I have already kept it at +3 and -50, +70. Let's push the shadow all the way, and then look at this noise. There is a bit of noise, but I think what it's doing still is incredible. Now we're trying to compare between Sony and Nikon here, and let's see how they both compare at 3200. Okay, and if you have to get a decent, good quality image without noise, how do you have to shoot these two cameras? So let's check it out. On the left you have the Nikon at 3200, on the right you have the Sony at 3200. Now if I zoom into the files, now look at them. Let's look at them at 3200 +3 exposure value. Shadows are pushed all the way. I do not see any difference. They look very similar to me. They really do. Clearly the Sony has more megapixels. As you can see, this is like a bigger file. As you can see, if you can move up and down further, so you're already cropping in more on the, compared to the Sony. You have less megapixel on the left side where you have the Nikon file, this one. And honestly, I find it difficult to see a difference. I just feel that it looks a bit more muddy, but I think it could be because it's got lower resolution. A bit more muddy only when you see it side by side. A bit more muddy. I'm trying to zoom in further. This got slightly deeper black, that's all. Okay, and Yeah, very similar. I don't see any difference. So both of them are doing fantastic here. What if I compare this with the Nikon Z9? Okay, and I go to Nikon Z9 3200. This is the Z9 and this is the Sony, right? Look at that. There is hardly any noise on the Nikon. What is the setting? Let me check the settings. Go to develop. Okay, I just have to increase the shadows more. This Z9 on the right, Sony on the left. Same settings, guys. Now look at it. Oh my god. I mean, look at the Z9. Oh my god. The Z9 is clean. And look how coarse these spots are. I mean, I can see both on the Z9, both on the Sony A7IV and the Nikon Z6II. At higher ISOs, the noise pattern is coarser, you know. They're like patches. They're like some the footprint of some wildlife. They look like patches. But on the Nikon Z9, you see some dots of noise, but they're tiny dots with a lot of space between them. Again, the Z9 has more megapixels. You can see the right side file is larger when you zoom in. You see, it's extending further. So this is amazing. This is amazing. Even when I zoom in so much, I don't see much noise on the Nikon. This is fantastic. So the Z9 is that much better. So it's very comfortable shooting the Z9 at ISO 3200. I'm pretty sure it can handle ISO 64 and 1250 like a champ. So this is incredible. Really incredible.